The conference room smelled like expensive cologne and anxiety. Maya Reeves stood at the back of the room, her work boots leaving faint red dust marks on the polished marble floor of the Johnson Space Center. She shouldn't have been there. The security guard had tried to stop her twice, and the receptionist had looked at her coveralls with the kind of polite disgust reserved for people who didn't belong in buildings with glass atriums. But Maya had driven 14 hours straight from Odessa, Texas, surviving on truck stop coffee and the kind of certainty that feels like insanity until it's proven right. She had $847 in her checking account, a 2003 Ford F-150 with a cracked windshield, and a solution to a problem that had cost NASA $43 million and counting. The drive itself had been a test of faith. Somewhere around San Antonio, at 3 in the morning, with nothing but darkness and highways stretching ahead, Maya had almost turned back. Her phone had buzzed with a text from her crew chief at Maddox Drilling. "Where are you? Permian 12 rig is down. Need you here." She'd stared at that message for 5 miles, her hands tight on the wheel, feeling the weight of responsibility pull at her like gravity. But she'd kept driving, past Austin, where the university students probably never worried about whether their ideas would be dismissed because of their accent. Past the small towns that looked like Odessa, full of people who worked with their hands and were never asked what they thought about anything that mattered. Past the invisible line where West Texas stopped being oil country and started being something else, something with possibilities she'd only ever seen from a distance. Dr. Gerald Whitmore stood at the front of the room, his pressed Oxford shirt practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. Behind him, a massive screen displayed what looked like abstract art, but was actually a thermal map of repeated bearing failures in the Mars rover's core drilling mechanism. 16 engineers sat around the conference table, their laptops open, their faces wearing identical expressions of exhausted frustration. Maya had memorized those faces from the research she'd done, staying up late in her trailer with her laptop balanced on her knees, learning everything she could about the team. Dr. Whitmore, doctorate from MIT, 23 years at NASA, 3 major mission successes. Dr. Patricia Chen, Stanford and Caltech, specialist in extreme environment engineering. James Park, the youngest in the room at 31, already published in 6 major journals. These were people who'd spent their entire lives preparing to be exactly where they were. And then there was Maya, who'd learned engineering from necessity, from broken equipment that needed fixing, and YouTube videos watched at 2 in the morning after 12-hour shifts. "The material science is sound," Whitmore was saying, his voice carrying the measured confidence of someone whose credentials covered an entire wall. "The alloy composition meets every specification. The thermal coefficients are within acceptable ranges. But we're seeing catastrophic failures at the 72-hour mark every single time. The bearing seizes, the drill stops, and we're back to square one." Maya shifted her weight, her hand tightening around the envelope in her pocket. Inside were 3 pages of calculations done on the back of repair invoices, sketches made on napkins during her lunch breaks, and a diagram that would probably look childish next to the 3-dimensional CAD models rotating on the screens around the room. She'd almost thrown them away a dozen times, convinced that she was about to embarrass herself in front of people who would see immediately how crude her work was. But the numbers didn't lie. She'd checked them 17 times, had her uncle Ramon, who taught her everything about mechanical systems, look them over, had even paid a retired engineer from the university in Midland $50 to verify her thermal expansion calculations. They all said the same thing. The solution was right there, hiding in plain sight, in principles that every field mechanic understood, but that somehow got lost in the complexity of aerospace engineering. A woman in a navy blazer was speaking now, her tone sharp with the kind of frustration that comes from expertise meeting the limits of its own framework. We've tried 17 different lubricant compositions. We've adjusted the tolerances down to micrometers. We've run simulations until the computers practically caught fire. The math works, the simulations work, but the actual mechanism fails every time. What if the math is looking at the wrong thing? Maya heard herself say. Her voice sounded too loud in the room, too rough, too Texas. She hadn't meant to speak yet, had planned to wait for a break in the conversation, find a diplomatic moment. But the words had come out on their own, pulled by the frustration of watching smart people circle around an answer they couldn't see. Every head turned. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that presses on your chest. Whitmore's eyes found her, narrowed slightly. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" Maya felt her mouth go dry. This was it, the moment where she either proved she belonged or confirmed every doubt she'd ever had about herself. "Maya Reeves. I sent the emails about the bearing problem." She took 3 steps forward before her courage could fail her, feeling every eye in the room track her movement. "I'm a diesel mechanic from Odessa, and I think I know what's wrong." Someone laughed. It was brief, quickly stifled, but it had happened. Maya felt heat crawl up her neck, the familiar burn of being dismissed before she'd even finished speaking. But she kept her eyes on Whitmore, refusing to look away, using the anger that threatened to choke her words as fuel to keep going. "Ma'am," he said, his voice perfectly polite and absolutely dismissive, "this is a closed engineering consultation. I don't know how you got in here, but—" "The Permian Basin," Maya interrupted, her voice stronger now, "gets down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit in winter. Then it hits 108 in summer. Oilfield equipment runs 24/7 in that temperature swing. Drilling rigs, pump jacks, generators. You know what fails first when the gear isn't maintained, right? Bearings, always bearings. And you know why?" Whitmore's jaw tightened. The woman in the navy blazer had her phone out, probably calling security. But one of the younger engineers, a man with dark circles under his eyes and coffee stains on his shirt, leaned forward slightly. Maya saw it, a tiny shift in posture that meant someone was actually listening, and she grabbed onto it like a lifeline. "Mars has even more extreme temperature variations than the Permian Basin," Maya continued, pulling the envelope from her pocket. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. "Your simulations account for the thermal expansion of the materials, but you're testing in a clean room with consistent atmospheric pressure. Mars doesn't have that. The problem isn't the bearing material. It's the tolerance calculations. You're building for precision, but what you need is adaptive clearance. The bearing needs room to breathe when it expands, but enough contact to maintain friction when it contracts. You're trying to solve it with materials science when it's actually a mechanical design problem." She stepped closer and placed the envelope on the conference table. The paper looked cheap against the polished wood, her handwriting visible through the thin material, a reminder of exactly how far outside this world she really was. "In oil country, we call it running hot and loose. You give the parts room to move in ways the engineers say they shouldn't. Except it works. It works in 100-degree heat and dust storms and equipment that hasn't been shut down in 6 months. Your Mars bearing is failing because it's too perfect." The young engineer reached for the envelope. Whitmore's hand shot out and stopped him, his fingers pressing down on the cheap paper with enough force to make a point. "This is absurd. Miss Reeves, our team has 73 advanced degrees between them. We've consulted with the top materials scientists in the world, and you're suggesting that the solution to a $40 million problem is in, what, sketches on a napkin?" Maya met his eyes. She'd seen that look before. Her whole life, from guidance counselors who'd suggested cosmetology school instead of engineering programs she couldn't afford, from the foreman at Maddox Drilling who'd hired her only because they were desperate and treated her like a mascot for 3 years before they realized she was better than half the men in the shop. From the loan officer who'd smiled sympathetically when she'd asked about business financing, then asked if her husband could co-sign. From her own father, God rest him, who'd loved her but never quite believed that his daughter could be more than he'd been. A good worker, a reliable hand, someone who fixed things but never designed them. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Napkin sketches from someone who's actually fixed this exact problem about 100 times. But you're right, what do I know? I just work with my hands." She turned to leave. She'd made it 4 steps when the young engineer's voice cut through the silence. "Dr. Whitmore, with respect, we've been at this for 9 months. What's 30 minutes to hear her out?" Maya paused at the door. She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see whether the room would laugh again or just wait for her to leave. Behind her, she heard the shuffle of papers, the quiet clearing of throats, the weight of a decision being made. "Fine," Whitmore said finally. The word carried the weight of a man who knew he was about to waste time, but was too tired to argue. 30 minutes, but Miss Reeves, if this is a waste of our time, I'll have you escorted out and banned from this facility permanently." Maya turned back slowly. The young engineer was opening her envelope, smoothing out the creased papers. The calculations she'd worked out over 6 weeks of evenings after 12-hour shifts looked even more crude under the harsh lights. She could see her own coffee stains on one page, a grease smudge on another, evidence of where these ideas had come from, not a pristine laboratory, but a world where solutions emerged from necessity and exhaustion. "Start talking," Whitmore said. And Maya realized, with the clarity of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, that she had one chance to make these people see what she could see, one chance to prove that the grease under her fingernails and the dirt on her boots didn't disqualify the legitimacy of her thoughts. She walked back to the table, pulled out the first sheet of paper, and pointed to the diagram she'd sketched while sitting in her truck during a lunch break, eating a gas station sandwich and wondering if she was crazy. "The key," she said, "is understanding that Mars isn't a laboratory. It's chaos with a thin atmosphere. Your bearing fails because you're designing for ideal conditions that don't exist. What you need is a system that adapts to imperfection. Let me show you how." For the next 2 hours, Maya taught a room full of NASA engineers how to think like a diesel mechanic. She explained thermal cycling through the lens of equipment that lived or died based on its ability to handle Texas weather. She translated aerospace engineering problems into the language of field repairs, where theory met reality and reality always won. She showed them that sometimes the answer wasn't more complexity, but less, not tighter tolerances, but smarter ones. And slowly, grudgingly, impossibly, they started to listen. The 30 minutes turned into 2 hours. By the time Maya finished explaining her modifications to the bearing design, 3 engineers had crowded around her sketches, and 2 others were frantically running calculations on their laptops. The woman in the navy blazer, whose name turned out to be Dr. Patricia Chen, had stopped looking at her phone and started asking questions that were actually questions, not dismissals disguised as inquiry. But Whitmore's expression hadn't changed. He stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, watching the excitement building around Maya's crude diagrams with the wariness of a man who'd built his reputation on being right. "The clearance ratios are unconventional," said the young engineer, whose badge identified him as James Park, Systems Integration. "But the thermal modeling actually supports this. Look at this." He turned his laptop so Whitmore could see. "If we adjust the tolerance bands to allow for this expansion gap, the contact pressure stabilizes instead of spiking. The failure point disappears." Maya watched the numbers cascade across the screen, seeing her rough calculations transformed into precise simulations. It was surreal, watching her late-night hunches become legitimate engineering, like seeing a reflection of yourself in a mirror that made you look taller, more substantial, more real. "And if you're wrong?" Whitmore asked quietly. "If we modify the entire bearing assembly based on—" He glanced at Maya's papers. "Napkin math, and it fails on Mars. We've just burned another $40 million in 6 months, not to mention the political fallout." "You're burning time and money right now," Maya said before she could stop herself. "How many test failures? How many redesigns? Your approach isn't working. Sometimes the solution isn't more precision. It's understanding how things actually fail in the field." The room went quiet again. Maya could feel the shift in attention, the way the other engineers glanced between her and Whitmore. She'd crossed a line, spoken too directly to someone with his credentials and authority. In Odessa, challenging the boss like that could get you fired before lunch. She suspected NASA wasn't much different. Whitmore's smile was thin. "Miss Reeves, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but enthusiasm isn't the same as expertise. We have protocols, peer review, testing procedures that exist for a reason. We can't just slap together a design because it feels right based on diesel engine experience." "I'm not saying it feels right," Maya replied, her voice harder now. "I'm saying the math works. Dr. Park just confirmed it. The thermal modeling supports it. You can peer review all you want, but first you have to be willing to look at something that didn't come from someone with the right degrees on the wall." Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "Gerald, at minimum, we should run a simulation with these modified parameters. It's not a commitment to implementation. It's just due diligence." Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Around the room, Maya could see the engineers waiting, hoping the same way her crew at Maddox waited when a piece of equipment was broken and the fix seemed impossible, but maybe, just maybe. "Fine," Whitmore said finally. "Dr. Park, run the simulation. But Miss Reeves, you need to understand something. If we pursue this, there will be extensive documentation requirements, technical reviews. You'd need to work with our engineering team to formalize these concepts. That's not a one-day commitment." "I have a job," Maya said, "in Texas. I'm not a NASA engineer. I just thought—" "We'd contract you as a consultant," Dr. Chen interrupted. "Standard rates for technical specialists. It's not uncommon. We've brought in field experts before. A machinist from Detroit once helped us solve a tool design problem. A commercial welder from Louisiana optimized one of our hull joint techniques." Maya felt something cold slide through her chest. A contract with NASA, the kind of thing that could change everything, or destroy her when it failed. "I need to make a phone call," she said. Dr. Chen nodded and gestured toward the door. "There's a courtyard outside. Take your time." Maya stood in the Houston humidity, her phone pressed to her ear, listening to the ring echo across 1,000 miles. It was 4:47 p.m. in Texas. Rex Maddox would be in his office, feet up on his desk, watching the production board and calculating how much money he was making while other people sweated. "Maddox Drilling." His voice was gravel and cigarettes. "Rex, it's Maya." "The hell are you? Julio says you called in sick, but your truck's not at home, and your mama says you left town. You better not be running out on a shift, Reeves." Maya watched a group of engineers in polo shirts walk past, laughing about something. They looked so clean, so uncomplicated. "I'm in Houston, at NASA. They want to hire me as a consultant." The silence on the other end was sharp enough to cut. Then, "That's a joke, right?" "No joke. I submitted a solution to a problem they've been stuck on. They want me to help develop it." "How long?" "I don't know. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer." "And you're calling to ask for leave?" "Maya, we're 3 guys short as it is. The Permian 12 rig is down with transmission problems, and you're the only one who knows how to rebuild that model. You leave now, you don't have a job to come back to." She'd known he'd say it, had felt it coming like a storm on the horizon. Rex Maddox didn't do favors, didn't believe in possibilities, only production schedules and profit margins. "I understand," she said quietly. "Do you? Because it sounds like you're about to throw away a solid paycheck for some fantasy." "NASA, Maya, really? You think they're going to actually listen to a grease monkey from Odessa? They're going to smile, take your ideas, put some PhD's name on it, and send you home. That's how those people work." "Maybe," Maya admitted. "Or maybe I get to be part of something that matters. Something bigger than fixing the same busted equipment, so we can keep drilling holes that wreck the groundwater." "Jesus Christ, now you're a philosopher. You've got until Monday morning to show up for shift. After that, you're fired. And good luck getting hired anywhere else in the basin when word gets out you walked off the job." He hung up. Maya stared at her phone, at the reflection of herself in the darkened screen. She looked tired. She looked like she'd driven 14 hours and walked into a building where she didn't belong and said things that might have just ended her career. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Your brother's asking about the truck payment. Did you send it?" No, she hadn't, because she'd spent the money on gas to get to Houston, on the printing of her documents, on the hope that this impossible thing might actually work. Another text. "Maya, he needs it by Friday." She typed back, "I'll handle it." Then she deleted it and typed, "Tell him I'm sorry. I'll send it next week." Her mother's response came immediately. "That boy depends on you. We all do. Whatever you're doing, I hope it's worth it." Maya closed her eyes. The weight of it pressed down. The truck payment her brother Carlos needed because he'd totaled his last vehicle driving drunk and was still on probation. The rent on her mother's place that Maya helped cover because disability checks didn't stretch far enough. The fact that her savings account had exactly $847 and would be empty the moment she paid for a hotel room in Houston for more than a few days. She thought about her father again, how he'd worked himself to death at 49, literally collapsed on a rig floor from a heart attack that the autopsy said had been building for years. How he'd never once complained, never once asked for more, never once believed that life could be anything except hard work, followed by early death. She'd sworn she wouldn't end up like him. But here she was, standing in a courtyard at NASA, gambling everything on a chance that might be just another way to fail. The door behind her opened. Dr. Park stepped out, his laptop under his arm. "We ran the preliminary simulation," he said. "Dr. Whitmore wants to see you." "Good news or bad news?" Maya asked, not sure which answer she was hoping for. "Complicated news," he said, "which is the only kind that's ever really honest." Back in the conference room, the energy had shifted. Half the engineers were packing up, checking phones, clearly dismissed. But 5 remained, including Whitmore, Dr. Chen, and Dr. Park. A new diagram filled the main screen, numbers and color gradients that Maya recognized as thermal stress analysis. "Your design works," Whitmore said without preamble. "In simulation, at least. The bearing maintains contact pressure across the full temperature range without reaching critical failure thresholds." Dr. Park ran it through 6 different thermal cycles. "It's solid." Maya felt her breath catch. "So you'll test it?" "Here's the situation," Whitmore said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone delivering news that was good and bad in equal measure. "Building and testing a prototype bearing assembly will cost approximately $200,000 and take 6 weeks. That's conservative. Then we need environmental chamber testing, vibration testing, full integration testing. We're looking at 3 months minimum before we know if this works in practice, not just simulation." "I can help with the build," Maya said. "That's what I do. I can fabricate the components, supervise the assembly. You don't have security clearance. Dr. Chen interrupted gently, or facility access credentials, or frankly, the formal training that our fabrication team requires for documentation purposes. What we need from you is technical consultation, answering questions, reviewing designs, troubleshooting problems as they arise. That's the role. Sitting in meetings, Maya said flatly. Essentially, yes, for which you'd be paid $175 per hour, standard specialist rate, for however many hours the project requires. Dr. Park estimates 40 to 60 hours of consultation time over the development period. Maya did the math in her head. $10,000, maybe more. Enough to cover 3 months of the bills she'd left behind in Texas. Enough to survive on if she was careful, not enough to rebuild a life if Maddox fired her and she couldn't find work. I need to think about it, she said. Whitmore nodded slowly. I understand. But Miss Reeves, I need you to understand something too. If you walk away now, we'll still build this design. We'll credit you in the technical documentation, put your name in the system. But the work will move forward with or without you. This is your chance to be part of something significant. Don't let fear or uncertainty make you give that up. Maya almost laughed. Fear and uncertainty weren't the problem. Bills were the problem. Rent was the problem. A truck payment for her brother's vehicle that he needed to get to his construction job was the problem. The fact that she had no safety net, no savings, no cushion between her and disaster was the problem. But Whitmore couldn't see that. He saw her hesitation as doubt, not calculation, as emotional uncertainty, not financial reality. To him, this was about passion and career fulfillment. To Maya, it was about whether she could afford to eat next month. I'll let you know tomorrow, Maya said. I need to make some arrangements. Of course, Dr. Chen said warmly. We're not trying to pressure you. Take the time you need. Here's my card. Call me with any questions. Maya took the card, felt its expensive weight between her fingers, and wondered what it would be like to live in a world where decisions like this were about personal fulfillment instead of survival. She drove that night to a motel off Highway 6, the kind with flickering neon and rates by the week. The clerk at the front desk had looked at her with the recognition of someone who'd seen plenty of people running from something or towards something and had long ago stopped asking which. She paid for 3 nights with her credit card and sat on the bed that smelled like industrial cleaner and old smoke, staring at her phone. She could call Rex back, apologize, beg for her job. She could go home, pay Carlos's truck payment, help her mother with rent, keep her head down and her hands busy and her dreams small enough to fit in the bed of a pickup truck. Or she could stay. She could sign the contract, take the risk, and see if the girl who'd learned to rebuild transmissions in her uncle's garage, who'd fought for every ounce of respect in a field that didn't want her, who'd driven 14 hours on a hunch and walked into a room where she didn't belong, if that girl was worth betting on. Maya pulled out her laptop, ancient and slow, and opened her email. Doctor. Jen's message was already there, the contract attached. One signature and everything changed. Her phone buzzed. Carlos, did you send it? She typed, not yet, but I will. Trust me. Then she opened the contract and started to read. The language was dense, full of legal terminology that made her eyes cross. But the core was simple. She would provide technical expertise, be paid for her time, and retain no rights to the intellectual property developed using her concepts. That last part stung. Her idea, her insight, but ultimately their property. She supposed that was how it always worked. The people with resources owned what the people without resources created. But at least her name would be in the documentation. At least she'd have proof. Something tangible to show that Maya Reeves from Odessa, Texas, had solved a problem that NASA couldn't. If it worked, if the prototype functioned, if the testing succeeded, if. She signed the contract at 11:47 p.m., her finger hovering over the touchpad for what felt like an hour, but was probably only seconds. Then she hit send before she could change her mind, closed her laptop, and lay back on the bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd call her mother and explain. Tomorrow, she'd figure out how to pay Carlos's truck payment on credit. Tomorrow, she'd start becoming someone she'd never been before, a consultant, a specialist, a person whose expertise mattered beyond the immediate need to fix broken things. But tonight, she just let herself feel the terror and exhilaration of having bet everything on herself, and waited for morning to arrive and tell her if she'd been brave or just foolish. 6 weeks into the project, Maya realized that being right was more complicated than she'd imagined. The prototype bearing performed exactly as her calculations predicted. The thermal expansion tolerances held. The contact pressure remained stable through temperature cycles that would have destroyed the original design. In every measurable way, she'd solved a $40 million problem with napkin math and field experience, but nobody wanted to admit it. "The documentation is insufficient," Whitmore announced in the weekly review meeting, his voice carrying across the conference room where Maya now sat as a regular presence, though never quite comfortable. "Dr. Park's simulation models are solid, but we need peer-reviewed analysis before we can present this to the board. I've reached out to Dr. Kowalski at MIT and Dr. Haddon at Stanford. If they validate the approach, we move forward." Maya shifted in her chair, the visitor badge around her neck feeling heavier each week. She'd been in Houston for almost 2 months now, living in that same motel room, eating cheap takeout, and watching her bank account dwindle despite the consulting fees. The math was brutal. She was making money, but Houston was expensive, and the bills back home didn't stop coming. "The approach has already been validated," Maya said, keeping her voice level. "By testing. The bearing works. In our facility, under controlled conditions," Whitmore countered. "Peer review ensures that we haven't missed something critical. It's standard procedure." "How long will that take?" Dr. Chen asked, her tone diplomatic as always, playing the middle ground she'd occupied throughout the entire process. 4 to 6 weeks for initial review. Longer if they have questions." "We don't have 6 weeks, Dr. Park said, his laptop open to what Maya now recognized as the mission timeline. "The launch window for the Mars cargo pod closes in 14 weeks. If we miss it, we wait another 26 months for orbital alignment. That's over 2 years of additional delay. Then we use the original bearing design," Whitmore said calmly. "It's flawed, but it's documented and approved. We take the risk of field failure rather than the certainty of missing the launch window." Maya felt something hot and sharp expand in her chest. She'd spent 6 weeks watching this dance, the gradual acceptance of her idea, followed by the immediate impulse to hedge, qualify, protect. Every time the data proved her right, Whitmore found a new reason to doubt. Not because the science was bad, but because the source was wrong. "You're seriously suggesting we send equipment to Mars that we know will fail because you don't want to admit that the solution came from someone without the right credentials?" The room went silent. Dr. Chen closed her eyes briefly. "Dr." Park winced. 2 other engineers suddenly found their laptops fascinating. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped into a register that Maya recognized from 100 confrontations with men who had authority and knew how to wield it. "Miss Reeves, I'm suggesting we follow established protocols that exist to prevent catastrophic failures. Your contribution has been valuable, but you seem to believe that innovation exempts us from professional standards. It doesn't." "Professional standards," Maya repeated, feeling years of frustration bubble up. "Is that what we're calling this? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're more interested in protecting your reputation than solving the problem." "That's out of line," Whitmore said sharply. "Is it?" Maya stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You brought me here because you were stuck. I showed you how to get unstuck. The prototype works. The data supports it. But you're going to wait for someone from MIT to tell you what I already told you, because that's the only voice that matters in this room. Maya, Dr. Chen said quietly, a warning and a plea. But Maya was past caution. 6 weeks of sitting in meetings where her ideas were discussed as if she weren't in the room. 6 weeks of watching engineers run tests that confirmed her calculations, then act surprised when the results matched her predictions. 6 weeks of being treated like a useful oddity, a bit of working-class novelty that had stumbled into insight but couldn't be trusted with the serious work. And 6 weeks of poverty creeping closer despite the consulting fees. Last week, she'd maxed out her credit card covering Carlos's truck payment and her mother's rent. Yesterday, the motel had sent a notice about her weekly rate going up. This morning, she'd eaten gas station coffee for breakfast because it was free and she needed to save money for actual food later. I walked away from my job for this, Maya said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of too many late nights and too much uncertainty. I gambled everything on the idea that you actually wanted to solve the problem, not protect your process. That prototype works. The math is solid. The testing confirms it. But you're going to wait for someone with a PhD from the right school to tell you what I already told you, because that's the only voice that actually has authority here. That's not fair, Dr. Park started, but Maya cut him off. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you actually listened to someone who didn't go to the same schools, didn't speak the same language, didn't have the same credentials? You brought me in as a consultant, but what you really wanted was for me to hand over my idea so you could process it through your system and make it acceptable. Well, here's the news. It's already acceptable. It works. What's unacceptable is that you're going to let this mission fail because you can't handle the fact that the solution came from someone you didn't expect. She grabbed her jacket from the back of the chair. I'm done. Find another consultant. Maya made it to the parking lot before the anger crystallized into fear. She sat in her truck, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and confronted what she'd just done. The consulting contract had been her only income for 6 weeks. The check she'd received had covered exactly 1 month of the bills she'd left behind in Texas. Carlos's truck payment, her mother's rent, the minimum payment on her own credit card that had been maxed out paying for survival. She was broke, officially, completely broke. And she'd just quit the only thing keeping her afloat. Her phone rang. Dr. Park. She let it go to voicemail. Then Dr. Chen. Also voicemail. Then a number she didn't recognize with a Houston area code. On the 4th ring, she answered. What? Miss Reeves, this is Eleanor Vasquez from the Johnson Space Center Public Affairs Office. I understand you just left a project meeting. Doctor, Whitmore contacted me with some concerns about your... Let me guess, Maya interrupted. He wants to make sure I signed an NDA and won't go talking to reporters about NASA's internal problems. There was a pause. Actually, Dr. Whitmore requested that we ensure you're treated fairly in any public-facing documentation related to the project. He's concerned that your departure might be misinterpreted. Maya laughed, the sound bitter even to her own ears. He's covering his ass in case this blows up. Perhaps, Vasquez said carefully, or perhaps he's more aware of optics than you're giving him credit for. Either way, I have a question for you. Off the record, are you willing to go public with this situation? Public how? The press conference, documentary crews, the whole narrative. Working-class mechanic solves problem that stumped NASA engineers. It's a good story, Miss Reeves. It's the kind of story that gets attention, funding, support. It could force the board to approve your bearing design without peer review, push it through on public pressure alone. Maya closed her eyes, imagined cameras, interviews, the scrutiny that would come with becoming a public story. She thought about her mother watching it on TV, about Carlos seeing his sister on the news, about Rex Maddox realizing that the mechanic he'd fired had actually been worth listening to. And it would destroy any chance I have of ever working in this field again, Maya said quietly. I'd be the woman who went to the media instead of respecting the process. No one would touch me after that. Maybe, Vasquez admitted, or maybe you'd become exactly the kind of advocate that this field needs. Someone willing to challenge the system. Either way, it's your choice. But I need to know now, because if you're considering it, I need to prepare the center's response. Maya sat in the truck, feeling the weight of every decision she'd ever made that had led to this parking lot, this moment, this impossible choice between burning bridges and burning out. I'm not going to the press, she said finally. I'm going back to Texas. I'm going to find a job, pay my bills, and try to forget that I ever thought I could matter in a place like this. That's disappointing, Vasquez said, and she sounded like she meant it. But I understand. For what it's worth, Miss Reeves, you did matter, regardless of how this ends. Maya hung up and sat in the silence, her phone dark in her lap. She thought about calling Rex Maddox, eating crow, begging for her job back. She thought about the bearing design, about the calculations that had kept her up nights, about the moment she'd realized that the solution wasn't complexity, but simplicity, not precision, but adaptation. She thought about going home as someone who'd tried and failed, and she wondered if that was better or worse than never having tried at all. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Park. Please don't leave. Whitmore just left the building. The rest of us want to talk. Please. Maya stared at the message, at the possibility it represented, at the fact that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been completely wrong about these people. That maybe there were allies here, engineers who understood what it meant to fight against a system that valued credentials over insight. She looked at her bank account one more time. $247. 18. Less than a week of motel fees. No job to go back to, no safety net, just a truck with a cracked windshield, an idea that had been proven right, and a decision that would define everything that came after. Maya turned off the engine. She sat in the sudden silence, feeling the weight of every choice she'd ever made that had led to this parking lot, this moment, this impossible decision between survival and meaning. Then she opened the door and walked back toward the building, not sure if she was brave or just couldn't admit defeat, and decided that maybe, in the end, there wasn't much difference between the two. The conference room looked different without Whitmore's presence, smaller somehow, less formal. Dr. Chen sat at the head of the table, Dr. Park beside her, and 3 other engineers Maya had worked with but never quite connected with. Samira Hassan from Thermal Systems, David Coe from Mechanical Integration, and Jennifer Wu, who ran the testing protocols. Before you say anything, Dr. Chen said as Maya walked in, I want to apologize, not on behalf of Dr. Whitmore, because I don't speak for him, but for myself, for the times I stayed silent when I should have pushed harder, for treating your expertise as provisional instead of foundational. Maya stood by the door, hand still on the handle, ready to run if this turned into another performance. Why tell me this now? Because you were right, Dr. Park said bluntly. About the bearing, about the process, about everything. And because we just had a 2-hour argument with Whitmore about whether we'd rather be right on paper or right in practice, and 4 of us decided we'd rather be right in practice. 5 of us, Jennifer Wu corrected quietly. David was on the fence, but he came around. Maya felt something cautious and fragile unfold in her chest. What does that mean practically? Samira Hassan pulled up a document on the main screen. We're submitting the bearing design for emergency expedited review. It's a process reserved for critical mission components where standard timelines would jeopardize mission success. It requires unanimous support from the engineering team and acceptance of personal responsibility if it fails. We're all signing on. What about Whitmore? Dr. Whitmore has removed himself from the project, Dr. Chen said carefully. He's requested reassignment to different mission components, which is it's probably better this way. He's brilliant, but he's also tied to methodologies that work 99 times out of 100. You're the 1% exception he couldn't process. And honestly, Dr. Park added, we need that exception. We need someone who looks at problems from angles we'd never consider. The system is designed to minimize risk by eliminating outliers. But sometimes the outlier is exactly what solves the impossible problem. David Coe spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. We're also proposing that you be formally hired as part of the engineering team, not as a consultant, as a mechanical systems specialist. Full-time position, benefits, relocation assistance if you need it. The pay isn't what you might expect. NASA engineering salaries are good, but not private sector good. But it's stable, and it's real. Maya felt her legs go weak. She pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, her mind racing through calculations. Stable income, health insurance, the ability to actually plan more than a week ahead. I don't have an engineering degree. No, Dr. Chen agreed, but you have field experience that none of us can match. Intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that we spend years trying to teach in graduate programs, and the ability to see solutions outside the framework that most engineers are trapped in. We can work with that. The degree can come later if you want it. Right now, we need you more than we need your credentials. Why? Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What changed? Jennifer Wu, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. Her expression was serious, almost pained. I spent 10 years as a manufacturing technician before I went back to school for my master's degree. I understand what you did to get here, the risk you took, the life you left behind, the way every day in this building probably feels like you're waiting for someone to realize you don't belong. She paused, and Maya saw something raw in her eyes, a memory of her own struggles. But here's what I learned. Belonging isn't about credentials. It's about being willing to solve problems that matter, even when solving them means challenging everything you were taught to respect. You did that. And yeah, it pissed off Whitmore. But it also reminded the rest of us why we got into this field in the first place. Not to protect process, to push boundaries. We voted, Dr. Park added, all of us, anonymously, not about whether your solution works. We already know it does. About whether we wanted to work with someone who makes us uncomfortable by being right in ways we don't expect. The vote was unanimous. Maya felt tears sting her eyes and blinked them away hard. She wasn't going to cry. Not here, not now, not after everything. I have debts. I have family depending on me. I can't just... The relocation assistance includes a signing bonus, Dr. Chen said gently, sliding a folder across the table. $25,000, standard for critical hires. It should help with the transition. Maya opened the folder with shaking hands. The salary number jumped out at her. $94,000 annually. More money than she'd ever made. More stability than she'd ever had. A chance to be something beyond the person who fixed other people's mistakes. She thought about her mother, about the phone call she'd have to make explaining that she wasn't coming home, about Carlos and his truck, about the bills that had defined her entire adult life, suddenly manageable instead of crushing. There's one condition, Samira said, and Maya's hope stumbled. Of course there was. If you take this job, you're committing to seeing this bearing through to Mars deployment. That means 2 more months of intensive development, then 6 months of integration and testing. It means late nights, weekend work, pressure that will make these last 6 weeks look easy. And if it fails on Mars, if something we missed causes mission failure, it falls on all of us. But mostly on you, because you're the one who said it would work. That's fair, Maya said quietly, meaning it. She'd never asked for guarantees, only opportunities. If the bearing failed, she'd own that failure the same way she was claiming this success. "Is it fair?" Dr. Park asked, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Because I'm not sure it is. We're offering you a position where failure means your name becomes synonymous with a $40 million mistake, while success means we all share the credit, but you're still seen as the exception, the unlikely story, the mechanic who got lucky. That's not entirely fair either." "No," Maya agreed, thinking about every unfair thing she'd navigated to get here, every double standard and lowered expectation. "But fair doesn't matter as much as right, and this is right. The bearing works. I know it works. I'll take the responsibility." Dr. Chen smiled, the expression weary but genuine. "Then welcome to the team, Maya, for real this time." The next 6 months were the hardest work Maya had ever done. She'd thought 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat were exhausting. She'd thought rebuilding transmissions with inadequate tools and impossible deadlines was pressure. But NASA redefined both concepts. The bearing design moved from prototype to production model, each iteration requiring documentation that made Maya's original napkin sketches look like childish scribbles. She learned CAD software at night, studying tutorials until her eyes burned, translating her intuitive understanding into the formal language of engineering. She sat through peer review sessions where her work was dissected by experts from around the world, fielding questions that sometimes felt like challenges and learning to defend her insights with data instead of gut instinct. But she also learned that she belonged here, not because she'd earned some credentials, but because she could do things these other engineers couldn't. She could look at a thermal expansion problem and see it through the lens of equipment that lived in the real world, not sterile testing environments. She could translate between theoretical models and practical application in ways that saved months of trial and error. And slowly, the team stopped treating her like an exception and started treating her like a colleague. "Check this out," Dr. Park said one evening. The building mostly empty, just the two of them reviewing stress analysis data. He pulled up a message thread on his laptop. "Dr. Haddon from Stanford. He reviewed our bearing design. Want to know what he said?" Maya braced herself for criticism, for the qualified approval that would damn with faint praise. He said, and I quote, "This is the most elegant solution to thermal bearing mechanics I've seen in 20 years. The designer has an intuitive grasp of adaptive engineering that most of my graduate students spend a decade trying to develop. Who is the lead engineer on this?" Dr. Park grinned. "I told him it was you, sent him your bio. He wants to meet you. Thinks you should consider a doctorate program. Says he'd supervise your thesis personally if you're interested." Maya stared at the screen, at the words from one of the most respected materials scientists in the world, offering her a path she'd never imagined. "I'm 34 years old. I'd be ancient compared to his other students." "So," Dr. Park shrugged, "you'd also be the one with actual field experience. That's worth more than age." She thought about it sometimes. Late at night, in the small apartment she'd rented in Clear Lake, the one that was nothing like the trailer in Odessa, but was starting to feel like home. A PhD, Dr. Maya Reeves, the girl from the oil fields with a doctorate from Stanford. But that was future thinking. Right now there was a bearing assembly to finish, tests to pass, a mission to save. 8 months after walking into that first conference room, Maya stood in the observation room at Kennedy Space Center, watching the Falcon Heavy rocket climb through the pre-dawn darkness on a pillar of flame. Inside the cargo pod, secured in layers of protective housing, was a drilling mechanism with a bearing assembly designed by a woman who used to rebuild diesel engines in West Texas. Her mother stood beside her, gripping Maya's hand so tight it hurt. She'd flown in for the launch, her first time on an airplane, Her first time seeing the ocean. Carlos was on her other side, his phone out, recording everything. He'd paid off his truck 3 months ago with money Maya had sent him. Her mother's rent was current, her own debts cleared. The constant weight of financial fear had lifted, replaced by a different kind of pressure. "How long until we know if it works?" her mother asked, her voice small against the roar filtering through the reinforced glass. 6 months, Maya said, watching the rocket become a point of light against the dawn sky. "That's how long it takes for the cargo pod to reach Mars. Then another month for the drilling mechanism to be deployed. Then we'll know." "That's a long time to wait," Carlos said, his voice carrying a respect for his sister that had been absent for most of their lives. He'd apologized 3 weeks ago, during a late-night phone call, for all the times he'd dismissed her dreams as impractical, for treating her like a paycheck instead of a person. Maya had forgiven him, because that's what you did with family. "Yeah," Maya agreed, feeling the word catch in her throat, "but I've gotten good at waiting." Dr. Park appeared at her shoulder, his badge now reading Senior Systems Engineer. The promotion a reward for his willingness to stand against protocol when it mattered. "Weather's perfect, trajectories nominal, all systems green." "Good," Maya said, forcing the word past the lump in her throat. "You know," Dr. Park said conversationally, "Dr. Whitmore sent a message. He's been tracking the project from his new assignment. He wanted you to know that he's proud of what we accomplished, that he recognizes his role in almost derailing it." "That's generous of him," Maya said without sarcasm. She'd spent enough time at NASA to understand that Whitmore hadn't been malicious, just trapped in a framework that didn't know how to process someone like her. "Tell him I said thank you." Dr. Chen joined them, her own family trailing behind, a husband and 2 teenagers who looked impressed and bored in equal measure. "The administrator wants to meet with you tomorrow. Press conference on Tuesday. You ready for that?" "No," Maya admitted honestly, "but I'll do it anyway." "Good," Dr. Chen said, then hesitated. "There's something else. The administrator is establishing a scholarship fund for young people from non-traditional backgrounds who want to work in aerospace engineering. They want to name it after you, and they want you involved in the selection process." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a realignment of how she understood her place in the world. The girl who'd learned to fix transmissions because her uncle needed help and couldn't afford to hire anyone. The woman who'd walked into NASA with napkin calculations and audacity. The engineer who'd proven that solutions could come from unexpected places if you were willing to listen. "I'll do it," she said after a moment, "on one condition." "What's that?" Dr. Park asked. "The scholarship recipients have to actually work. No free rides, no lowered standards. I want them to earn it the way I did, by being better than they have to be, because they have to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified." "That's not entirely fair either," Dr. Chen observed gently. "No," Maya agreed, "but it's real. And teaching them to work within the unfairness while fighting to change it, that's the real education. That's how you build people who don't just survive the system, they transform it." The rocket was gone now, lost in the morning light spreading across the Atlantic. But somewhere in that cargo pod, secured and protected, was proof that Maya Reeves had been right. That field experience mattered, that formal credentials weren't the only path to expertise, that sometimes the solution to an impossible problem came from someone nobody expected, who'd driven 14 hours on a hunch and refused to accept being dismissed. Her mother squeezed her hand again, tears running down her weathered face. "I'm so proud of you, Miha. Your father would have been too." Maya thought about her father, dead from a rig accident when she was 12, the man who'd first taught her that machines had personalities, that fixing things was about listening as much as knowledge. He'd never finished high school, never had credentials, never been recognized as anything more than a field worker who happened to be good with his hands. "I know," she said quietly, her own tears finally breaking free. "I did this for him too. For everyone who knows things, but never gets asked. For every person who's been told they don't belong in rooms where decisions get made." 6 months later, the signal came back from Mars. Maya was in a team meeting, reviewing thermal data from another mission component, when Dr. Park burst through the door. His face was flushed, his hair disheveled, his laptop clutched in both hands. "It works!" he shouted, loud enough to startle everyone in the room. "Maya, it works. First core sample is extracting now. The bearings operating at optimal efficiency across the full temperature range. No degradation, no failure indicators. It's perfect. Better than simulations predicted." The room erupted. People Maya had worked with for less than a year, who'd become something like family, surrounded her with congratulations and relief and triumph. Dr. Chen hugged her, breaking protocol and not caring. Samira Hassan was crying openly. David Coe was already drafting the success report that would be distributed to mission control, to the administrator, to the world. But Maya stood quietly in the center of it all, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Not triumph exactly, not vindication. Something deeper, like the satisfaction of a repair completed perfectly, a problem solved not just adequately but beautifully. Like the feeling her father must have had when an impossible fix worked, when broken things became whole again through skill and understanding. Someone popped champagne, contraband in a NASA building, but no one cared. Plastic cups were distributed, toasts were made. Maya found herself pulled into a dozen conversations, accepting congratulations from engineers who 3 months ago had still referred to her as the consultant, and now called her by name. That night, alone in her apartment, Maya opened her laptop and stared at the blank screen for a long time. There was an email she'd been drafting for weeks, the one she'd promised herself she'd send only if the bearing worked. The email was to Mrs. Peterson, her high school guidance counselor, who'd suggested 20 years ago that Maya wasn't college material and should consider practical alternatives. Maya had never forgotten the conversation, the gentle dismissal, the way her dreams had been reshaped into something smaller and more acceptable. She started typing, "Mrs. Peterson, you probably don't remember me." But then she stopped, read the words, deleted them. Mrs. Peterson didn't need to know. The success wasn't for her benefit. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving herself right, that the voice in her head that had always insisted she was capable of more, that the limitations others placed on her weren't real, that expertise could come from unexpected places and still be valid. Instead, Maya opened a new document and started writing something else. Not a letter, not a vindication, but a guide. A roadmap for the next person who'd walk into a room where they didn't belong, with an idea that seemed impossible and credentials that didn't match the expectations. She wrote about the fear that never quite goes away, even when you're proven right. About the bills that keep coming, regardless of whether you're chasing dreams or just surviving. About the weight of other people's needs and how they pull at you even when you're trying to fly. But she also wrote about the moment when you realize you belong, not because someone gave you permission, but because you decided you did. About finding allies in unexpected places. About the fact that being underestimated could be an advantage if you were stubborn enough to prove your worth. She wrote until dawn, until the words became a map for a journey she'd already completed, detailing every wrong turn and dead end and moment of despair, because those were as important as the triumphs. Then she saved the file, titled it simply, "For the Next One," and sent it to Dr. Chen with a note. "Put this somewhere the scholarship recipients can find it. Let them see the whole story, not just the success." The Mars bearing designed by Maya Reeves exceeded all expectations. transforming scientific understanding of Martian geology and earning her recognition from NASA and the academic world. Yet her greatest achievement was inspiring a young community college student who saw herself reflected in Maya's unconventional path into engineering. Moved by the message, Maya encouraged the student to apply, affirming that real-world experience and persistence matter as much as formal credentials. Reflecting on her own journey, from oil fields to NASA, Maya decided to accept a part-time PhD program at Stanford, embracing the next challenge despite the difficulty. She recognized that her success was not luck, but the result of stubborn determination, practical insight, and refusing to accept exclusion. As the bearing continued to function on Mars against all odds, Maya prepared to build the next impossible thing, proving that those once unseen often belong everywhere their expertise takes them.